Story 1. Way back in high school, I had a female friend. I'm a guy. We were neighbors and were very close in a non-romantic way. She and her family were very devout Catholics. Skipping a long story, she became pregnant at a young age. That tool of a boyfriend not only dipped out, but mom and dad disappeared with him to another state. Termination wasn't an option. Religion. It was long ago and I was young, so I can't remember whether baby was stillborn, but I was there for his birth. The nurse handed her the baby and she right away asked for the priest to come baptize the baby. Priest comes in, she's still holding the baby. I'm in the room, as are her mom and dad. She asks and begs him to baptize the baby, and he gives some shallow reason not to and stands up to leave. Watching that scene unfold and hearing my friend's awful, guttural cries at the thought of her baby not getting baptized filled me with so much rage that I blacked out. I snapped out of it with her dad bear hugging me and very much out of breath. I evidently moved to hurt that priest right there in the delivery room, and her dad stopped me. My friend never got over the loss of her baby and how that priest ignored her needs. She ended her life a few years later. I'm still angry and it's been over 20 years. That's a tough one. May their souls rest in peace. Story 2. This definitely isn't that bad, but when I was a kid, I watched a Twilight Zone episode that my dad called Time Enough at Last. My dad doesn't have good judgment when it comes to parenting decisions. This is all I remember about it. The main character loved to read, and all he ever wanted to do was read, but he never had much time. I didn't really have any friends, and everyone kind of teased him about how he loved books. He was an older dude with glasses. He worked at a bank, and every day he ate lunch alone in the bank vault and read. One day he's eating lunch and feels and hears an explosion. He goes upstairs and everything's been blown up. No one is left. He turns on the radio and there's no one anywhere, so it's like the whole world got wiped out. He walks around, a bit sad and confused. He then realized he had unlimited freedom. Tons of food and tons of books to read with all the time in the world, which is what he's always wanted. He's immediately filled with so much joy, and you as the viewer feel so happy for him and touched by his pure happiness and joy. So he grabs his favorite snack to eat when he reads and sits down next to a stack of books, finally happy that he's able to spend his life doing what truly and only makes him happy. It's what he's always wanted. And then as he leans down to grab a cracker or a book or whatever, his glasses fall off and break and he can't see anything. He starts sobbing and then it ends. I'm 22 now and I still think about it way more than I should, and it always makes my stomach hurt. I don't know how exactly, but seeing that at that age did something to the way I viewed and felt about the world and just the way I looked at life. It was definitely a subconscious impact back then, but looking back on it now, I'm like, oh, so that's where my existential dread stemmed from. Story 3. Two little girls were playing on a bicycle in a park near the street. They were trying to go around the park riding the same bike, one of them pedaling and the other one moving the handlebars. I was walking on the sidewalk towards the park. When I was about 10 meters away from the girls, they lost control of the bike, went towards the street, tripped and fell under the trailer, right in front of the last set of wheels. The driver stopped and literally fell on his knees, crying as soon as he saw what happened. The girl's mom lost it, crying uncontrollably, screaming and pulling her hair. An angry mob started to form and rough up the driver. The guy was screaming, "Please end me. I deserve to be gone." But a woman who was with a mother saved him from the mob and started to comfort him, telling him it wasn't his fault. I was shocked, frozen in place, watching all this happen around me until I snapped out of it and ran home. It was a horrifying accident that gave me nightmares for weeks. Story 4. I spent a few months in prison a few years back, and in the gym, I befriended a guy from the same corridor as me. Eventually, we were smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee in his cell when I asked, "What put you here?" Which is something you should generally never ask anybody inside the Rock, because the joke is that everybody's innocent. But by that time, we were already pretty good buddies, so he did not mind. So he says, "There's my folder behind you on the shelf. Take a look." I wish I did not. In these police and evidence files that were in the folder, there were very, very graphic pictures. Worse than you can ever see in a horror film. Some guy owed him some money for some ice. He had gone to his house and ended him. Some questions are better left unasked. Of course, we continued our coffee moment normally and life in prison went on. Eventually, I got released. He'll be locked for another 6 years by now, I think. And I haven't kept in touch. Not because of what I saw, but just because he was a career criminal. And I have a normal life and career and just made one mistake that put me there. I am now continuing in the normal life path. That's crazy intense. I wonder why this dude's cellmate has his rap sheet with him, though. Story 5. My wife's beloved dog got hit and went under a truck when my niece took him for a walk. My wife, extremely upset that her dog of 16 years was gone, insisted and kept going on and on to see the dog. I had to put him back together and spend most of the time cleaning him up. I took a blanket from his dog basket and kind of wrapped him up, washing his head and legs. I brushed hair over his wounds. I know this sounds stupid, but I just imagined I was preparing him for an open casket. The blanket helped a lot. I just presumed she was going to pick him up, and instead she just wanted to kiss his head and rub his ears. She put some of his toys and treats beside him. In the end, I felt I did a good enough job so that she could view him one last time. My wife made her peace. I never really thought about appreciation beyond making sure my partner could have that moment with him. What I learned from it over time was how important it is to understand and comprehend other people's suffering. To acknowledge closure was another thing I'm slowly understanding as I try to become the best man I can be. To all pet owners out there, perhaps take some inspiration and go spend time with your little friend. Life is short and those moments and memories really do last forever. Story 6. Recently, this happened to me and my grandmother. In Oregon, we have death with dignity laws, where a person we know is terminally ill can choose when they wish to go and do so in a painless way and still with a sound mind. The laws are very strict because of the implications they could have. She did take the concoction and our entire family was there to be with her in her last moments. It sounds better in your head than in reality. I wish I hadn't been there. She was so selfless she didn't want to bother us. She said we could be there if we wanted, but she didn't want to be a burden on us. I got there when she was already asleep and unconscious, or at least she may have been at first, I don't know. She writhed in pain. I don't know if passing away could ever be comfortable, but she moaned and writhed. Her eyes sometimes opened slightly, showing the whites of her eyes, only to flutter close. My uncle was hunched over her, assuring her she was okay and that we were there. My uncle is one of those macho men who thinks everything from flour, soap to sandals make you gay, and he did not want anyone to see him cry. He bellowed at all of us to leave the hospital room, full of his siblings and their children. I insisted on staying. I needed closure. Some of the women left the room, but all of the men and my aunt stayed. She just moaned until she suddenly let go. At first, she was tense and writhing, then, at a moment's notice, she was just limp. Her skin almost instantly went from pink and rosy to pale and gray. At first, I was glad to be there for her. I regret it now. Story 7. When I was a kid, I stayed with my grandparents in a different country for school term, about 2 months. The house had a cellar that housed my grandfather's work tools and benches, as well as a fridge. I went into the cellar to get a drink and saw my grandfather in a chair with his head thrown back and eyes closed. He was having fun with a suction tube that cleans up sawdust. I didn't know what he was doing at the time and kind of stared, trying to figure it out. He saw me and instantly stopped and I ran away. I remember telling my grandmother about it in a jokey way because I thought it was funny. I think back to that and cringe. That is one smart and creative grandpa. He had a good thing going until this dude ruined it for him. If you thought that was crazy, wait until you hear about the other stories I have. So hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more. Story 8. When I was young, an old teammate of mine had a little brother who passed away from cancer. I remember the child-sized coffin, the church filled with people, and the blue football jersey he had on that was just too big for him. The part I won't ever forget and that I can still hear is when they began to lower the coffin into the grave. My old teammate let out this heartbreaking wail, so desperate you could feel it echo inside your own heart, realizing that that very moment is when it truly hit her that she would never see her little brother again. She fell to her knees as her dad tried to catch her. I can see her grabbing for her dad as she fell, and I can see her on her knees, sobbing in his arms. I've seen and heard some crazy things. 13 years later, and I'm right back in that moment at that cemetery, watching one of the worst moments of this family's life, a moment frozen in time, and it's still just as heartbreaking now as it was then. Story 9. My dad taking his last breaths. He had motor neuron disease for a short time. The day it happened, 30th of April this year, I got a call from my stepmother's cousin saying I better come see my dad fast. I could tell by his voice that this was probably it. I ran to him as fast as I possibly could. He only lived about 5 to 10 minutes away. Just as I reached the door, my brother's girlfriend came out and said he had gone. I ran in and he was making a sound like he was gasping for air. And every time he did it, his body would sit up a little and his arms would flail a little bit. I see this every time I try to sleep. I wish I had been just a bit later, to be honest. Story 10. Getting hit by a car. Do you ever just feel like time stops? You say, yeah, this is the end. Well, I lived a good life, I think. It is scarier if the car is being professionally piloted by a hammered Karen telling me to watch the road while I was in pain. I thought that she would never call the ambulance and I would have just gone while she was yelling at me. The only reason I survived was because there was this one absolute saint walking on the other side of the road. If he wasn't there, I'm pretty sure the woman would have never called the police, and I would have just met my end. She got sued, of course. I also somehow lived without major injuries. So, a good ending, I suppose. Man, that was horrible. But this dude's reaction to passing away is a real winner. Story 11. My daughter, on life support, was brain dead after a car accident before she was wheeled away to be an organ donor. My daughter, Jillian, was young when she passed away. Just a couple of weeks before the accident, we had to renew her health card, Canadian here. It was her first time signing for herself. Jill asked about the organ donation option on the form and I explained it to her. Her response was, why would anyone be so selfish to not donate their organs when they're already gone? She passed away 2 weeks later, and I had no doubt in my mind what she would have wanted done with her precious organs. She gave 7 people a new lease on life, and 7 families now have their loved ones with them due to her selflessness. Her new health card came in the mail the day before her funeral. Story 12. I'm a midwife. We don't always look after moms with happy endings. I do a lot of bereavement work. We don't get support for this, even with the really tough cases. It's just part of the job as far as management is concerned. I often go to the store cupboard and have a little cry by myself. I talk to the babies. I use their names. They deserve to have them heard. Story 13. A young boy was hit by a car in my cul-de-sac a few years ago. I didn't see it, but I ran to help when I heard his mother screaming. I had first aid, but it was clear I couldn't do anything. He passed away at the hospital later. I wish I never saw it because the memories of the sights and sounds are still ridiculously clear. It makes me really appreciate EMTs, emergency room nurses, and doctors who have to deal with tragedy on a daily basis. Story 14. When I was 20, I got hit by a car. was crossing a street at a fork in the road, and the driver wasn't paying attention and had her signal on to go down the road I wasn't crossing. By the time I realized she was going in my direction, I started running but got hit. When I got out of the hospital, I asked my boyfriend to stay with me because I was having flashbacks. He came over and dumped me because he couldn't deal with my issues. I had a nervous breakdown and my best friend figured it out and came and got me, brought me to my other best friend's apartment because they had a spare room and made me call my parents. They came and got me the next day, and that was the second time I saw my dad cry. The first time I was so young that it didn't affect me. The time it did, though, I felt horrible. I still do. That I was such a burden on all those people, my friends, my family, and my suddenly ex-boyfriend. I swore I'd never ever be a burden to anyone again. So far, so good. I just hope this girl eventually realizes that what happened to her wasn't her fault, so she shouldn't feel like she was a burden. Story 15. I grew up on a small farm. When I was visiting home from college, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of dogs fighting. I ran and woke my mom and dad up, thinking maybe a coyote had gone into the yard and was attacking her dog. My dad grabbed his gun and we ran outside to find 3 very angry pit bulls attacking our goats and chickens. One dog had her dog by the throat and my dad shot it, which obviously got the attention of the other dogs who started running at him. My dad shot them too. There are laws in my state that allows for firearms to be used to defend farms and protect livestock. Then as the chaos subsided, we finally took in the damage. The dogs had taken about 10 of our chickens and feathers covered the ground. The worst part was that our oldest doe and our billy goat had both been harmed too. I will never be able to unsee the state of the goat I had bottle-fed from birth. It was one of the worst nights of my life, just because it was so painful to see so much destruction. Story 16. I've seen a few incidents of passing while growing up. The one I want gone is when I was sitting by the window in debate class, goofing off with my female friend. About 8 feet out next to a tree were 3 kids. A car flies down the street, we looked up. Outside, the kids looked up. The car went over the curb. A high schooler gets out of the car and shoots the kid on the left. The kid just dropped. The other 2 were shot as well, as the guy got back in the car and they took off. And then we hit the ground and dove. It wasn't the most gruesome incident I witnessed, but just the way he fell like a marionette with strings cut is etched in my mind. Story 17. My mother's last breaths. Cancer sucks and I hated watching it destroy everything about her and being completely unprepared for it. My father had no idea what to do, and up until the funeral, he thought, God might bring her back. It was the event that marked the moment my immediate family began dissolving. It overshadows a lot of the good memories of her and, unfortunately, is the first to pop into my head when I think of her. Second worst, watching a cat get hit by a car. Too far away to intervene beyond yelling, then seeing the owner come out, ripping it off the road, and trying to drive to the vets with a poor animal by his side. Third, watching my brother-in-law, too hammered to even understand what was going on around him, slur and yell at a family dinner. My kids haven't seen him since and he refuses help. I can't legally force him to get it either. He suffers from visual and auditory hallucinations and experiences bouts of memory loss but still insists on driving. Bad enough that he has called the police and said that punks were drinking beers in his backyard, vomited in the chairs and left a mess. He could not account for his afternoon, but all the cans left were the brand he prefers in empty Clamato bottles, his chaser of choice. Story 18. I'm a volunteer firefighter, and this is one of the rare calls that really stayed with me in a bad way. We got called out to a baby in a seizure. The baby was unconscious and not breathing when we arrived. I had to pull it out of its car seat rocking chair thing, put him on the ground and begin CPR. I remember the mother was home and was an absolute mess, and her crying and panic really got to me. The color and the strange thing going on with the baby's eyes when I did compressions still stay with me in a big way. I didn't do CPR for long. Another volunteer who was also an EMT professionally took over for me when he had the bag set up the way he wanted and got me getting the defibrillator ready to check for a shockable rhythm. I didn't quite have them ready when EMS showed up, and I was removed from the room to allow more room for work. EMS took the baby away and I never found out what happened to them. I wish I never saw how that baby looked. It was probably only the second time I've ever held a baby, and I haven't held one since. My nephew was born this weekend and I'm terrified to hold him. Story 19. I'm a mechanical engineer. When I was in school, the professors would always remind us about the Yale lathe accident as a cautionary tale about following shop safety rules. Basically, a graduate student was working in the shop late at night, unsupervised, when it was believed that her hair got caught in the rotating part of her lathe. If you don't know what a lathe is, it's a machine that can spin metal very quickly with a lot of force and usually does not have a lot of guarding around the dangerous parts because it would hinder its ability to effectively shape metal. It basically rolled her up onto the machine. The worst part is, according to the news articles, she did not die instantly. She died of asphyxiation when her windpipe got crushed. She was likely in excruciating pain as she passed away. You used to be able to just find the pictures of the aftermath on Google Images by searching Yale lathe accident, but it doesn't look like it comes up anymore. Anyway, I looked it up while you could still find them just out of curiosity. I wish I didn't see that. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? Story 4 is so unnerving. See you in that video.